I'm pretty sure that's the universal term for this thing called the clicker.
The clicker thing.
Well, hello everybody. I'm really looking forward to sharing some thoughts with you on prosperity. And because I come from a philosophy of human-centeredness, and Huddle is an agency based in Melbourne where we specialise in human-centred design, and our clients that we work for basically give us the context within which to do that. So it might be that we're helping design services, or we're working with CEOs and their leadership teams, and then we're doing strategic design. Or it might be at the interaction level where we're helping people solve a really specific interaction. But where it actually all comes from is from a place of human centricity. So that's the lens that I'm going to bring to this topic of prosperity today. And it's a shame that our first speaker, Mehrdad, has left, because I would have loved the debate with him as well, because a lot of the time when we talk about prosperity, we're talking about it from an economic lens. And I'd like to explore that a bit today, and the role of design in leveraging that. So this has been written and illustrated by yours truly, and for that, the drawing bit, I do apologise. That is an ear. And what I'd like to do is first establish listening. So one of the things that Maureen mentioned in her, I guess, opening speech was that there is a designer in all of us, that we're actually capable of doing design, and you don't necessarily need to have gone and done industrial design or human-centred design or whatever to be qualified. And of course, by having that education, that experience, it certainly brings capability and knowledge to the table. I don't mean to dismiss that. But the majority of the world doesn't necessarily choose to become trained in design, and that doesn't necessarily mean that this topic of design thinking is off the table. So what I'd like you to do is practice something that design thinkers do all the time, which is called reflective listening. And it might be called a whole bunch of different things in the different contexts. And what reflective listening is listen to what I'm saying, but also listen to what's coming up for you when you process what it is that I'm saying. Sometimes it's just called being present, really. But one of the things that happens is when people are talking about new concepts or new ideas, and this happens all the time in our space of design, what we don't do is connect with how am I, as the person who's receiving this new concept, new idea, new perspective, responding to it. And if you can do that type of listening, then you can take yourself out of what the message is that's being delivered, and that's how you build empathy. So I'd like you to practice reflective listening while I'm talking. Can we do that? Okay, good. All right, so we've heard a perspective of prosperity, which is usually from an economic lens, and it's focused on growth. Growth, growth, growth. We have to grow. Growing is good. That's what we want to do as organisations, and that's what our shareholders expect us to do. So that's what we're going to do. And we're looking at different ways on how we can do that. So I guess my stance as I stand up here and in this privilege of being able to address you all is to question whether or not that's actually the case. And what we should be doing is perhaps thinking about redesigning growth. So we know that more is not necessarily better, don't we? Yeah? And sustainable development is something that is getting more airplay at the moment in the world of economics. Now, I really, as I established the listening, I should have also established my credibility when I asked you to listen to me and reflect on what you're hearing. I do not have a background in economics. I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about economics. My background is in human-centred design. Okay? So that's an important point. But this is something that the sustainable development conversation around economics is something that obviously resonates with me because I hold the humanity space. I want to make sure that whatever it is that we design, we're doing it in service of humanity. So I guess then did you see what I did there with the O and the S, by the way? See how that's a smiley face now? That was me. So now we're thinking about prosperity from a human perspective. So in that, I guess we would also be considering health, and we'll be considering spirituality, and we'll be considering happiness, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, one of the things that I haven't sort of called out as a separate thing altogether is the topic of Earth, our environment, as a part of prosperity. Because for me, where that sits is actually in the human lens of prosperity. So for me, when we talk about prosperity and from the stance of design, we really need to be designing for the whole. And I know that there are people out there that absolutely have this perspective when they're talking about prosperity and when they're talking about designing for prosperity. But often the debate, like even this morning, I haven't heard a lot about what does our growth strategy and achieving these growth targets, either for our organisation or for the nation, what impact does that have on the state of humanity as a whole? So I want to introduce another concept. When I was thinking about economic prosperity versus humanic or human prosperity, what I got was this sense of external and internal. So I'm just putting this out there as something for you to just sit with. So economic prosperity relies on things that are externally referenced to us as people. So things around our market share, our profit margin, our revenue growth. They're things that are external to us. And when we think about human prosperity and the elements of human prosperity, they're actually things that are internal. So our health, our happiness, our spirituality. So there was this sense of external and internal. So this is going back to my point at the very beginning, my quote. If as organisations, as nations, we are actually interested in being in service of our customers or our citizens, then we actually need to be operating and thinking in that way within the organisations that influence those outcomes for the people that we're in service from. And again, this is the internal and external perspective. When we talk about prosperity, inherent in that discussion, there's got to be something about values and what people value. And one of the things that we do as designers that are interested in studying people is we observe them. And sometimes we observe them by sneaking around and they don't even know that they're being observed, and sometimes we observe them with their permission. So there are two broad groups of value sets that we all have: means values and ends values. Now, I'm sure some of you in the audience already know about these. So the means values are the things that we can observe. So these are the behaviours that are actually descriptions or examples of things that we value in the moment to be able to get to something that's actually deeper. An ends value is the thing that sits at the deep level. It's actually the motivator of the behaviour. So I'll give you an example from my own personal life. In my 20s, I loved socialising. So Friday, Saturday nights, group group of friends would get together and we'd go out to a pub and would have drinks and we'd talk about stuff and it would be great. If you were observing me, you would say that particular person really likes being surrounded by lots of people, enjoys having a good time, and friendship's really important to her. That's the means value. The reason why, the thing that motivates me to go out with friends and have a beer at a pub is actually the need for human connectedness. That's the ends value. That's the deep insight. So when we talk about insights, there is a hierarchy. I don't know if it's a hierarchy, perhaps. There was a conversation that I had with Munib, who's in the audience somewhere, yesterday, where we said perhaps it's not a hierarchy. But there are things that you observe that you might go, that's a finding. Then you go back and go, why is that happening? It might be the means. And then you ask again why, and you get to the deep insight. And this is what informs our stance when we're designing something. So, if you were to observe me now, in my current decade, you can fill in the gap there. I'm not that old. What you would observe is me going to restaurants with a small number of people and would be having a glass of wine and going to bed at 8:30. That's a secret that I wasn't supposed to share. And then you would come to the conclusion that she likes intimate conversation and she likes fine dining. And even though the original finding when I was in my 20s was about a big group of friends and being out in a pub, and now we're in a completely different context, the ends value is exactly the same, which is about human connectedness. So this is, and I'm harping on this because what is happening internally is what actually manifests externally. So this was a really wonderful quote that I came across. Sorry, I'm just looking at the timer. I was trying to work out if it was going up or down. It's going down. I have to go quicker. So how can we become a mature civilization when our practices destroy the source of our wealth? So we're talking about mining, we're talking about gas, we're saying Australia's in a really great position because we have all these deposits and that's great for us in terms of the economic lens of growth. But when you think about it from this perspective, when you think about it from the perspective of humanity and civilization, how are we designing for this? So if you're an organisation and you are designing and delivering services for your customers, it's kind of like your customers are those deep deposits of value for you. So if you're going out there and designing services that are pretty crappy, and you're kind of, you're doing your best, but bureaucracy is getting in the way and process and legislation and stuff is actually stopping you from being able to deliver that experience that actually has that source of value be respected, and you're just extracting from it. How can we think differently about service delivery if we were to use that analogy? Which brings me to this model, I guess. I don't know. At Huddle, we call this the value maturity model. It's something that was made up. Kylie, how long ago? About a month ago. And this is really from our just experience on working with different organisations and their different levels of maturity when they think about value. And I thought that it was important to share here because of the topic of prosperity. So when we think about value extraction, what we're really saying is probably about we're 20 years ago kind of mentality in business, where it was our motivation is to extract as much value as we possibly can from the customer at any cost. So we were talking about things like increasing share of wallet. We were talking about how do we make sure that they buy as much products from us as possible. And we're still having those conversations, but it was in the absence of design, in the absence of customer experience. So that for us, as we've termed it, is value extraction. So I guess if we were to take these as lenses on the economic stance of prosperity, which is an absolutely valid one. I'm actually not dissing it. I'm just saying that we need to think of them both at the same time. There's a lot in there that's probably about value extraction. So then we get to the context of value exchange, which is probably where we're at the moment, where we've got organisations that have actually got, design teams and customer experience teams and advocates for the customer floating around like rats on a ship, as Jeremy was saying, which is actually about changing it from being a conversation about extraction to a conversation about exchange, where the stance of the organisation is genuinely about providing a service of value in exchange for whatever the monetary relationship is. So I've only got 3 minutes and 59 seconds to go, so I'm not going to go through the rest of them, but you can read them. The value creation and value transformation models are the ones that we're just moving into. Now, there are examples of services that do value transformation, where in the exchange, there is transformative effect on the recipient and the provider. Now, what my question is perhaps the value exchange and value extraction part of this diagram is the economic focus of prosperity, the stance of economic growth. And by putting in a different stance, which is the humanic stance, the human-centred stance, perhaps what we'll start to unlock are the possibilities for a human lens of value exchange. So I'm skipping through, that's very interesting. So how do we actually leverage design? It's really great that Jeremy's talk preceded mine, because it's kind of all of that and mindset, which is something that I'm really passionate about. We can talk to you about all of these different frameworks, about how design enables a different pathway than the traditional, we have a problem, jump to solution mode. Lots of pressure, go, 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 get the right solution out the door. To one which is actually about redefining the problem, searching for deep insight, opening up opportunity spaces, prototyping and testing, and then arriving at the right solution at the right time. So if we were to take this particular framework, so what I was going to, let me finish my train of thought there. There's lots of those, but if we have the current mindset, which is an analytical mindset, or it's an evidence-based mindset, or it's a linear, step-by-step, focused on one small part of the system at a time mindset, those frameworks and methodologies still not going to get us to the systemic change that we're actually here to achieve. So these are the mindsets that I think true prosperity actually requires of us. So one of the things that design handles beautifully is ambiguity. And it's one of the things that freaks us out as people, especially in a corporate or a government context. We need to know that what it is that we're working on is going to result in the thing that we said that it was going to do. We need to know that. And so what we do is we work in a way and we use processes that control the risk of ambiguity. But it's usually in ambiguity where the deep insight and the realisation lies. And what design does is it turns it up on purpose. It turns it up. And the mindset that we need to bring to that is one of comfort with ambiguity. The other one that I want to mention is courage. pause for effect. There are a lot of decisions that we need to make. There are a lot of pathways that we need to go down that are different from what we have become used to in the past century, basically, the industrial era, that is going to require an amazing amount of courage to be actually step into that space of, we have never done this before. But I believe in it. And sometimes belief doesn't come with evidence. Sometimes those things that are of value can't actually be measured. So along with ambiguity comes this sense of courage. And I think one of the things that stops us from being courageous is that with courage comes vulnerability. And this we talked about this morning, which was about the fear of failure. So I'm going to finish up really quickly with this tiny little story which sets up the finishing point, which is we were working with a large organisation in Australia, privileged to work with the CEO and the group executive team. One of the group executives, very passionate about the customer, and said, look, this is a really important piece for us because we truly believe that we have the opportunity to design a desired future for our customers. And that's what we want to do. And I said, that is great. What a wonderful stance. And then I looked at that person in the eyes and I said, do you believe that you can design your desired future for yourself? And I'm going to leave you with that question. Thank you.